Hello and happy Friday. If you get deep into the weeds of the cannabis media sphere, you may have recently seen a viral LinkedIn post that said that an Illinois flower labeled at 46.31% came back at 28% when the buyer sent the product to a licensed lab. This post obviously raises questions about lab methods, COAs, and what to do when numbers look far outside of the norm. Today, I'll be joined by the individual behind this post to discuss their findings and proposed solutions. Folks, I am Cole Preston. You can find all of my content at colememo.com. You can sign up for my upcoming newsletter at colememo.com/subscribe. That's how you can stay up to date on Illinois drug policy and much more. This show is brought to you by listeners like you. So if you'd like to help keep independent coverage alive, smash that like button, share with a friend, or donate $1 at colememo.com/support. Once again, we're live on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, so feel free to drop your questions or thoughts in the comments. We may feature and address them on screen. If you're catching this later and wondering how to catch the show live, I'd say the best way is to head on over to colememo.com/YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you never miss a stream. This podcast is also available for streaming on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other podcasting platforms, or at colememo.com. I was surprised to learn that requiring cannabis products to be tested by independent third-party laboratories is a relatively new concept, barely a decade old. And to be clear, cannabis testing did exist well before 2015, but it wasn't mandated until Colorado led the way. California and other states followed with their own requirements later, and today, independent lab testing has become a defining standard of state legal cannabis markets. And we'll talk about this, but when I say independent lab testing, again, we'll talk about this. We'll learn more. You'll understand why I'm doing the air quotes. There are still a few outliers. Maine, for example, they do not mandate testing for all legal sales. I think they only do for for adult use and not medical, but I could be wrong on that. Google it, folks. If you've looked into the subject at all, you'll know that lab testing has been under the microscope, pun intended, with many questioning its legitimacy. Allegations of lab shopping, in which retailers or product manufacturers seek a testing lab that will produce favorable results, have dogged the industry for years. According to a report from MJ Biz Daily, industry operators, along with a National Association of State Regulators, view oversight by reference laboratories as a best practice that should be standard across all state-regulated cannabis markets. Now, we've written about the fact that the state of Illinois is going to be rolling out their own cannabis testing, cannabis reference lab. You can read about that at colememo.com. I'll have that link in the show notes. Now, critics argue that having a reference lab or a state contract with a third-party lab does not guarantee lab oversight. So once again, today's guest is Kirk Berry, and we're going to be taking a closer look at the world of cannabis testing. You might recognize Kirk as the author of that post that I mentioned earlier, where he documented a cannabis purchase that was labeled at 46.31%, but when he independently tested it, it came back at 28.19%. So he sent that to a licensed lab, by the way, to do that test. But we'll talk about that here in just a moment. And this isn't the first time he's uncovered results like that. So let's bring on Kirk to talk about what he's found, why it matters, and most importantly, perhaps, what he thinks will fix the problem. So grab your lab coats. It's time to separate the science from the smoke. You're tuned into
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chong, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
All right, Kirk, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
It's going well. You know, I've talked many times about the Cole Memo, but I've never met him.
until I met you. So thanks so much for having me on the show, Cole. It's an honor. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for the time. I've been really looking forward to this. I wanted to bring you onto the show to talk about what you found when it comes to integrity of the patchwork of state legal cannabis markets. And, obviously I saw your posts. I've seen you on different shows like the Dales Report. I wanted to give a few shout outs to other creators in the space. Senior Savvy Cannabis, I think, was a show you went on. But anyways, I'll get those shout outs out of the way. Do you mind introducing yourself to my audience?
Sure. So my name is Kirk Berry. I am the president of Clarion GRC. And really what I do is I travel the country shelf testing products for both the cannabis and the hemp sector. And in fact, I'm sitting in my RV right now in a state that will remain anonymous.
There you go.
And I work for attorneys and little government agencies sometimes and individuals. And man, I'll tell you, consumer safety, really label accuracy is such an important issue. And I'm really glad to be part of that. A big part of what I deal with is fraud, whether it's document fraud and a testing record called a certificate of analysis or what's on the label, or maybe even sample fraud, where a licensed entity sends a fraudulent sample into a lab for testing. So there certainly is a lot going on in this space and a lot to talk about.
Absolutely. And I want to just tee you up. I'm sure this will give you plenty to run with here. One of the big promises of legalization was that consumers would finally have access to clean, tested, and safe products. And, we've been told like testing systems like California or Illinois are the gold standard. But when reporters and investigators like yourself have dug into this, the story seems to fall apart. Maybe the accuracy is, maybe the lab reports aren't so accurate. What do you think's going on here? Why do you think this is?
Yeah, and let's give the viewers kind of a broad brushstroke here. Look, I estimate that about 50% of the labels in the cannabis sector are improperly labeled, whether it's potency, yeast mold, or pesticides. In fact, there's a study that I'm privy to in another state. I can't give it out right now. Just was finished. 88% of the products that were tested on the shelf are horribly mislabeled and have pesticide issues and yeast and mold issues. And this is for cannabis, an adult use cannabis state. So look, we have a problem, right? The consumer has a problem, and it's not a small amount of products on the shelf, 50%, 40%, 30%. It's just, that's too high of a number, to be inaccurate and sitting on the shelf for someone to buy. People with a compromised immune system or whatever have you, right? It's a real risk to be smoking a flower product, a pre-roll with yeast and mold levels that are unacceptable. You mentioned something at the beginning of the show. Here's something to think about. We say independent third-party testing, right? I don't know that it's really independent.
Right.
Because, let's say Berry Grow goes out and what do? I choose my lab vendor. I choose what lab I send my product to. And so I don't know how independent it really is a vendor of choice. And that creates a challenge for the cannabis business, because at the end of the day, the cannabis business can't point to the lab and go, well, these are the results I got. And so that's all that's on the package. And it's been tried in litigation. That aspect has been tried in litigation in California. And the judge denied it and denied a motion, because the judge ended up in the ruling saying, hey, you are responsible for the label on the package and the product inside of it, not a lab. So it's challenging, Cole.
It's interesting because, and we'll reference this in a bit, but the Chicago Sun-Times investigation, one of the things that they found when they did some similar work to you, and I want to actually ask you a little bit about your work before we really, dive deeper. They did find that some cannabis cultivation centers are building a lab within their cultivation center. So they do their testing within house and then send it. So I thought that was interesting. But anyways, I referenced your post at the beginning. we don't have to get into the specifics of that post yet, but can you just tell people a little bit about what you do? Like you mentioned, you investigate fraud. You're in a state, that we won't name right now. But tell people in a nutshell what you do, because I think it's super interesting.
Sure. So, I go from state to state and I shelf test products, and I'm looking for a product that's accurately labeled. Look, I always start with a null hypothesis, which is
Mhm.
everything's fine. The label is accurate, and I'm not going to find a problem here. And then I have the product tested and we see what happens. The case in Illinois is a rather interesting one. And it's not just Illinois, it's all over the US. Look, there is no flower product at 46% total THC. Doesn't exist. And so when I find a product that's labeled like that, I go, oh well, let me buy that off the shelf and go have that tested. And when I do testing, I do one of two things. I can test myself, right? Or I can contract with a licensed cannabis laboratory in the state. In this case, the sample you brought up, I took that to a licensed laboratory in the state of Illinois and had them run analysis on it because accuracy was really important to me, or something that we could rely upon at a later date was important to me, as opposed to me using a built for purpose solution here.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit like about how, maybe the process works, because I think it's important to mention that, like, some people don't understand sometimes, like, the product like that you buy from the dispensary, it itself wasn't tested. There was a batch that was tested, represented, or a sample that was representative of the batch. Right.
That's exactly right, Cole. Exactly right. Yeah, that's what happens. So, a grower grows 1,000 pounds or whatever the number is, and they're required by regulation to send a particular amount to a lab for testing, whether that's 1 pound or 10 grams or whatever it happens to be. And now supposedly you have a representative sample, right, of the whole batch, and now you're packaging it, and now it's going through the supply chain to the distro, and ultimately to the retail, whatever have you. And I think that the cannabis business, by and large, desperately needs to take a different approach to how they go through their labeling process. They should be doing, I've talked about this in the past, they should be doing inline testing, right? Built for purpose solutions that are potency accurate are available out there. They're not that expensive, $15,000, $20,000, $4 a test. And you can set up inline testing, and you can test your products for potency, which is one of the big issues. You should know if you sprayed your product with pesticides. You should know if you've got a yeast and mold problem. But one of the big things you might not know is, what is the potency? So if you're just going to take a small batch of something and send it in for testing, you risk everything else not being accurate. Hey, I did 100,000 run pre-roll, send 10 in for testing. Did you homogenize your batch properly? So if you have inline testing, you'll know, right, as you're at pre-roll 50, at pre-roll 500, at pre-roll 2,000, 3,000, whatever it happens to be, test in line, find out what your potency is, and go, okay, great, we've got a great track record. We know this is our potency. Now let's send it to a lab to get that certification, if you will, right? And then on the shelf, the product goes with an accurate label on it. But unfortunately, almost no one does inline testing. It's actually shocking. They all just say, well, the regulatory sector says I have to send product out to be tested at a lab. So I pick the lab I send the product to, and I go have it tested, and here's my product on the shelf.
I also think one of the things that you brought up at the very beginning there is another contributing factor. The sample size that's required. I feel like it's unrepresentative, and I don't mean to paint with too broad of a brush here, because different states, there's a different patchwork of different patchwork of rules in different states is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And so, but even so, I've grown my own cannabis, and like, back to your point of homogeny, like, cannabis flower itself is very much a heterozygous mixture. I mean, it's a flower, so it's almost like not consistent even through the plant. Sometimes I don't mean to speak on all breeders, but you grind it up, and it is not homogeneous. And for people that are tuning in and maybe not, you remember the science experiment, folks, with the oil and the water where it's not mixing in. That's what we're talking about, where it's like not. Is that a good example where it's like it's not a consistent mixture, cannabis flower, like some other products are?
Well, the question really is, can you have an accurate label?
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm asking.
Right?
Yeah,
that's really the question. Can you have an accurate label? Well, when I test cannabis products and I go into a store and I go, okay, I buy these 6 or these 7 or these 10, and I go back and test them. Why is it that the product is somewhere between right on the money and under by 20, 30, 45, 46%? Why aren't if cannabis flower is all over the board in terms of potency, depending on where it sits on the plant, how come I'm not seeing product on the shelf that comes in at a much higher rate than what the label says? Why don't I find any of that? Why is it all under? It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Why is it all under or right on,
Well, and what I've heard you say in the past and what I've heard others say is that if you're honest and give people honest results in the test, if you're a testing lab, sometimes they don't, that's not necessarily favorable. In other words, people shop for higher results. Can you speak more to that, what you've heard? I mean,
and you know what I think is important, Cole? I hear when people talk about lab shopping and all of that, I think too much focus is on the lab. And let me say why. What is the genesis of the problem? What's the causal? If I have a false label, right, for potency, what is the causation of that? It's the licensed cannabis business, not the lab. The lab may or may not collude with the cannabis business, but the causation is the cannabis business. Because I'll tell you, a cannabis business could walk right into a lab and go, hey, I'd like to use you for all my testing. Hey, I do $500,000 a year in testing, but if you give me something that's inaccurate, I'm going to file a lawsuit against you because I don't want a lawsuit myself. But that's really not what goes down between the person who's asking for testing and the lab itself. It should be pretty common knowledge by now that there's this constant drumbeat. Hey, here's my product. If it can't come in at least 32% total THC, don't even bother. I'll take it somewhere else. I mean, I haven't heard those words myself, but those words have been repeated to me by lab owner after lab owner after lab owner across the U.S. But typically, I think what's going on is a sample is being fraudulently doctored. It's being doctored, right? Whether it's keefed or sprayed with some
distillate.
type of concentrate. Yeah, sure, it's disty, right? Sprayed with distillate, maybe THCA distillate. So now my numbers are up. You give that to the lab. Maybe the lab has a hard time telling whether or not a sample has been tampered with. And so they give you results, right? And it's kind of easy to tell at 46%. I mean, the highest advertised THC I've seen is Bruce Wayne in Michigan at 50%. So that's the highest I've seen for natural flower product, which we know doesn't happen. So sometimes it should be easy for the lab to tell, and they should have systems in place to address that. Sometimes it's not so easy. Look, there's a lot, I believe, and I've seen it in my own testing, there's a lot of flower out there that's advertised at 28, 29%, because that doesn't ring any bells necessarily at the regulatory sector, right? It's really not 28 or 29% at all. It's 18%, 19%, 21%, just like the product I bought when you first started the show, 27%. I went, yeah, well, that's kind of what I expect to find for high-end flower. 27%, 28% total THC. That's a nice bud.
Yeah,
it looks nothing like what was in the package. How can it be that far off? Well, it's either sample fraud or collusion with the lab. One of the two.
So that's what I wanted to drill down on is what's the answer there? Like, because again, back to where you started, and I'm so glad because I was going to swing it there. when people throw around the term third-party independent lab, it makes it sound like this is a completely blind test. Somebody, you're left with the impression that like somebody comes in and picks a random sample, and that's very much not what is occurring. Like these operators, like you said, can pick their own samples. So like, what's the answer to this sample fraud?
Okay, so and let's use the term sample fraud and stay within the confines of that for a moment. What's the answer?
Yes.
Here's the answer. Stop it before the transaction occurs. Once the transaction occurs, the fraudster wins, right? I put it on the shelf, I put it on label, I made my money, I'm done. You want to stop it before that happens. Shelf testing, in my opinion, and not just because I do it, that should be happening in every state on a regular basis. And the reason is because I catch it right now. I address it right now. I have you pull your product off the shelf right now, or whatever happens. Maybe you just get fined, right? I find it. I write a report on it. You get fined, and maybe you don't do it again. That is the answer. Even a reference lab, as great as that is, right? Love reference labs out there. Okay, here's your reference lab. This product was found to have to be potency problem, 40% off potency. Let's send it to the reference lab. So you send your product to the reference lab. Do you now know what the problem is? What's the causality of the problem? No, you don't. You just know. All the reference lab knows now is what I know. And that is, hey, I've got a product that's not labeled correctly. I think the focus should be on the cannabis businesses, not necessarily on the lab. If none of the cannabis businesses want to commit fraud, none of the labs are committing fraud. If none of the cannabis businesses want to be involved in fraud, don't want to collude with a lab, then no lab is colluding with them. Go to the genesis, the beginning, the cause of the problem, the root of it. Fix it there, and everything else downstream is fixed. Like a polluted stream.
Yeah.
You can be downstream and clean up all day long, but the water's still polluted. Why? Because the source is still there. The source of the problem is the cannabis business. It's not necessarily the lab, but in some cases, the lab is colluding with the business to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see a commenter is commenting about hemp. We'll talk about hemp probably at the end. I think that's a good topic to talk about. But like Kirk said, we're going to remain within the confines of, we're talking about state legal cannabis right now. Because again, oftentimes it's sort of labeled as the gold standard, the answer to the issues. And I think we should very much try to firm that up. If that's the answer, we should try to make it better because there's many known issues. And so thank you for addressing sample fraud, because like you say, it's not necessarily while there are, and maybe we can talk, maybe that's a good segue. I don't know if you have anything else to say on the subject, but I think it was good that we made the point that while there are certainly, we've heard of, I should say, cases where labs will say, hey, we can work with you to get better, results. That's not necessarily what always happens, is the point, right? Yeah.
Sure. And listen, let's say I have a product and I grow it and it's moldy, right? I've got a mold problem and I know I do. Okay, yeah. How do I get the batch to test and pass testing? I'll tell you what I do. I pick bud out of a different bag and send that in for testing, something that I know is clean. I get my test results and hey, look, see? Clean test results. See how easy it is to defraud the system? It is so easy to defraud the system. And that's why shelf testing is so important, because when the fraud is done, the evidence is sitting in the package.
Right. So, just I want to cover some things specific to Illinois in a moment, but since we were talking about we were kind of talking about sample fraud and potency inflation, but some of the things that I've seen that are concerning, for example, is investigative reporter at the LA Times, Paige St. John, discussed what she's uncovered. And folks that want to read more or listen to the interview I'm talking about, I'll have it linked in the show notes. I was doing some digging into this subject beforehand and thought this was super interesting. So for the first 5 years after legalization, California required testing for 66 specific chemicals, but enforcement relied entirely on these private labs that we're talking about. And according to the findings of the LA Times, in those 5 years, there were no pesticide recalls, which of course sounds great, right? But St. John's findings told another story. So basically, they analyzed nearly 600 cannabis products, both within the state market, and they even did some illicit products. And they found the contamination rates were actually roughly the same between the two markets. But the key difference was the illicit products tended to have one of the chemicals off of that list of 66. The legal products often contained unlisted or unregulated chemicals. In other words, okay, you're going to say we can't use these 66, we won't. And that's just super concerning. Have you found anything like that?
Sure. Here's the saying. Are you ready? Write this down. Spray
Yes.
around the list.
Man.
Spray around the list. Just look at the list, what's on the list, and don't use any of those carcinogenic products that might cause cancer. Go out and buy a different one that's not on the list that might cause cancer. Right? And just use that product. Oh, because the lab's not going to test for it. And if the lab's not going to test for it, well, then that's the one I'll use. Now, spray around the list. It's just like the back door keeps the front door open, for inversion and diversion. Well, the other saying is spray around the list.
That's just so concerning to think about. With obviously pesticides to consume in any form are probably not great, but when people are like potentially vaping or lighting it on fire, that just seems like a recipe for disaster, like even worse.
Yeah, I think, I don't know for sure, but I would hazard to guess that, 10, 15 years from now, after people have vaped a whole lot of products, that we're going to begin to see some medical issues showing up that maybe weren't there at the onset because, not enough product had been consumed by an individual.
Yeah. Well, I did a podcast in the past. I'll just flash it on the screen for folks that want to see. It's episode 112, The Science of Cannabis Cultivation. And one of the things that this guy had said that I thought was interesting that I wanted to get your thoughts on is that, like instead of just having end product testing, which is what most of the cannabis regulation requires, it's just, the finished batch before sale. In food manufacturing or pharmaceutical, there are mandated quality checks, like with your water, your air systems, the rooms, and it just seems like continuous environmental testing, which prevents contamination long before the products even reach the consumers, should be something that the cannabis industry considers, because it seems like it lacks it entirely. We're just testing the end product.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be a mindset change, a shift, if you will. So right now, I think the drumbeat is just past the regulatory issues. Just get past the regulatory sector, and we're good to go. We're golden. And actually, I think that's very short-sighted, because the reality is cannabis businesses are selling a product to a consumer, and they're going to rub it on their body, smoke it, vape it, eat it, ingest it in some way, right? And the real problem, I think, that the cannabis business needs to be focusing on is consumer safety. And so current good manufacturing practices, QA, quality assurance, QC, quality control, inline testing. These are the kind of things that the cannabis business should be doing, because I don't think you have to worry as much about the regulatory sector as you do class action lawsuits and lawsuits for injuries, and the regulatory sector coming around and doing a broad sweeping shelf testing program. Those are the things I think you really need to be worried about, or concerned about, because they're going to hit you hard, in your pocketbook at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you have any concerns as somebody who looks at these labels and I feel like maybe, I don't know if I've heard you establish this. Do you do this because like you are a cannabis consumer and you're concerned about the health impact, or have you ever been asked why do you do this? Why? Yeah.
Yeah. And listen, I have no problem with cannabis or hemp for that matter, in the with some nuanced exceptions, because I believe that anything that brings you back towards homeostasis, go for it, right? If that happens to be cannabis for pain control, I did some research years ago, and 25% of the meds that are prescribed to people in the United States of America are for pain control of one type or another, depression, whatever have you, right? And so obviously it's important to people to have something. So if cannabis is your thing, great, do your thing. I don't do this because I'm a cannabis consumer. I do this because I care about consumer safety. And so I want to be in the trenches. I want to be boots on the ground. I want to be involved in consumer safety, identify consumer fraud, so that the industry will be prompted, prodded, encouraged to change. In a perfect world, every label will be accurate and we wouldn't have any problems, right?
Right.
In a perfect world. So
in a perfect world. Well, cool. Thank you for addressing that. And what the question I was about to segue to, but I just thought of that while I was working my way towards this question. Have you heard about remediation and kill steps? Because again, in the spirit of the only testing that's required is end product testing. Obviously, remediation is if the state flags it, then you can remediate it, like in the case of Illinois, and resubmit a sample as a distillate, which can be used in edibles. Many people don't know that. But and we've had companies that offer this technology on the show in the past, but the distinction between remediation and kill steps is that people will basically use the same technology before you send it to testing, so to guarantee that you pass testing. Have you heard about this, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and so I know of a few flower companies that actually remediate as a standard course of business as part of their SOPs, right? Hey, we remediate all of our flower because I don't want to lose 250 grand, right? From a harvest we just did. So just remediate everything, and then we'll pass the yeast and mold test. So sure, it's done. I'm agnostic. I don't know. Do I like it? I don't like it or not like it. It exists, right?
I guess my question is, do you think it should be labeled?
I don't know.
Because I know that, even some of the companies that have come on my show, I've seen online at least that there have been movements to label if products have been remediated, and these companies have said, no, that this would confuse the consumer. On the other hand, like I say, and I'm not naming names, but they've come on my show and they've said, these processes are safe. There's nothing to worry about. So it's like, all right, well then why not just label it,
So let's say you've got a problem with mold on your plant, and so you remediate it, and let's say you're successful, right? Mm-hmm. And now you pass testing. What are you smoking? Dead mold on your
right.
Dead mold on your flower, right? It's not like somebody scrubbed it off of there. Mm-hmm. You've just killed everything, hopefully, right? Unless it's systemic, and then perhaps you haven't. I'll bet there are some consumers out there who have compromised immune systems that sure wish it would be on the label. How about that?
Yeah. Well, and Canada, I know for a fact they require irradiated products, which is a form of remediation, to be labeled. Right. The same with food products. I think even in the States, if they've been irradiated, we have like peanuts or whatever, they're labeled. So, just a question, I ask the same question to the Chicago Sun-Times investigators. Like, maybe again, I'm not necessarily saying anything's wrong with it. I don't have any. It's like a pasteurization with milk. That's what I understand it to be, almost.
Well, and listen,
that's what I wonder if it should be labeled. So.
There's some good folks out there. I know Willow Industries. I toured their facility. Hey, I think somebody who's trying to address the yeast and mold problem is doing a great thing. Hey, at least it's being addressed. Is it safe or not? In other words, safe to consume after? I have no idea. That's outside my area of expertise, really.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, just because I was in Denver once, and they reached out and were like, you want a tour? And I was like, sure. And one of the things that I thought was interesting about them was that they're not just pitching their kill step technology. They're trying to prevent you from having to use that at all, which is sort of like what I was talking about at the beginning of the show, which is this like holistic look at your HVAC, your water, your, scrub down your growing room after between crops, things like that.
Sure, because there are obviously some successful growers out there that are growing product that doesn't have a yeast and mold problem, right? So you're right. Go causation, get to the cause, the root of the problem, fix that, and then you won't have to irradiate your product or run it or do that kill step. Yeah.
So I'm curious. We'll watch a short clip on this investigation into the Chicago Sun-Times here in a moment, but I just wanted to like give some background. So Illinois has some of the strictest rules in the nation for cannabis safety and quality. Their thresholds for mold, yeast, and bacteria and other contaminants are much lower than other states, hard to meet, which is, of course, at least I've talked to a few testing labs in the state. That's actually why they say some of these companies will do those kill steps to ensure they, like you said, it's part of a lot of people's standard operating procedure, because these, especially in Illinois, requirements are so tough. But it is interesting, in the Chicago Sun-Times, they found Illinois officials do little to actually police the tests that are performed to ensure they're done properly. So while the state can discipline growers, they've only done so in a handful of times. Like, I actually FOIA'd the state of Illinois. I'll throw it on screen really quick. You can see at a glance here these were the only fines that were issued between 2019 and 2020. This was a FOIA from another outlet called Grown In. I submitted a new FOIA and actually got them to turn over redacted data, which I had to work with the Attorney General, the state's Attorney General's office. But we also got some unredacted data, which I'll try to make a little bit bigger here. One case we found a operator was applying pesticides in the flowering stage, which is obviously concerning. I've got it on screen right now. And they got a pretty big fine for it. The other fines were just like failure to secure doors or maintain records. Not seriously alarming things. I think the pesticide thing was the most alarming. But one of the things that is a little bit alarming is that, first of all, you can go through a process where this data becomes confidential. So that's why I had to get redacted data, if you noticed that. And I had to work with the Attorney General's office to get this data, which I'll put on screen really quick. They wouldn't tell me anything that happened, just that somebody was fined $10,000 and $15,000, but they blacked out the description and the cultivation center. And like I said, they weren't even willing to hand me that over. I had to work with the Office of the Attorney General just to get those very vague information. And when the Chicago Sun-Times asked them about this, like, hey, we're not seeing any failing pesticides tests between 2019 and 2021. Does that mean there were no failing tests? And the state officials declined to answer. So I just don't understand why there's so much confidentiality. Recall data is protected in Illinois. So while there has been one known instance of a recall, all of this information is protected. And it's just like, I'm curious your thought on this, because in states like Michigan, for example, people will point and say, wow, there's so many recalls. And it's like that. I think that's a good thing, because it reminds me of what we see with restaurants, where unfortunately people have to be named and shamed.
Yeah. And maybe on another show, we'll talk about, I did a post one time and I said that food trucks are inspected twice as often as cannabis businesses. But, and I've got some data on that. Look, here, I appreciate everything that the regulatory sector does to protect the consumer and to regulate the cannabis sector. But we've got a problem when we have such a high level of failure with product on the shelf. You can have amazing regulations, all kinds of rules that the cannabis business has to jump through in order to have their product on the shelf. But if you're not going to enforce anything, what good are they? mean, at the end of the day, if you're not going to enforce anything, what's the problem? Because the bad actor, and there are a few out there. Look, I'm not impugning the entire industry by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, the bad actor out there that goes, well, what do I need to do? Well, risk reward. Well, nobody's really doing any shelf testing. And look, there haven't really been any recalls in my state. So just go ahead and spray it, spray it with a pesticide and put it on the shelf. And chances are, I have better than a 99% chance I'm not going to get caught. And even if I do, there's no recall. Well, what's the risk? There's no risk. The risk is so minimal. So they do it. Or diversion, right? You grow, the state grows 800,000 pounds more than it can, more than it sells a year. And so it goes out the back door and, oh, well, since nobody's really watching the back door either, or my chance of getting caught is so slim, well, why not do that too? And so the problem is only going to be fixed when the regulatory and the enforcement sector and the civil litigation side of things really focus on the problem makers and cause the sector to change. I believe that I'm just going to throw a number out there. The banking industry has a 10-80-10 rule. 10% of the people will never do anything wrong no matter what. 10% of the people always will, and 80% of the people are going to have some form of situational ethics. And so, you want to focus on that 80%. And there's so much that can be uncovered and dealt with in a very simple process called shelf testing. You don't need to try to get a reference lab together and spend $5 million in 2 years getting it going, right? Shelf test product, find the business, cause change, healthy industry. It's not that difficult.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And do you have obviously you said you work with different people, because I've looked into this. I've thought about doing this, but I would have to crowdsource with my listeners because it's so expensive. Do you have any recommendations? Is it just that we need to get together and kind of pool up some money to do some shelf testing? Or I guess I'm looking for, you said call you?
Yeah, call me. Call me and let's see what we can do. This is literally what I do. And I might be in a different state almost every month.
Do you have a website or something people can go to, or just look up Kirk Berry on?
Yeah, sure. I'll look me up on LinkedIn, Kirk Berry, or go to clariongrc.com and get my information, or mjtip.com.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you can actually go and make an anonymous tip on what's going on in the industry, or shoot me an email and we'll have a confidential conversation. And look, the bottom line is consumers have to get involved.
Well said.
The regulatory sector needs to see through another pair of eyes what's happening right in front of them. They need these shelf tests being exposed and done. And then they go, oh, I guess we do have a problem, right? And something needs to be done. Maybe look at Massachusetts and what's been going on with them for these last several months, and the big shakeups that have happened there. And, and labs need to be involved. Hey, good labs know who the dirty labs are. Start calling me. Let's get something done. Why do you want us? If the industry is going to survive in a healthy manner, it's going to have to address the fraud issue. It's going to have to address the non-compliance issue. And that takes everybody, including even the cannabis businesses. Sit back and do nothing, then nothing happens. Sit back and say nothing, then nothing happens.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Well, just a few other thoughts that I thought were interesting. We'll cue some clips. I'm curious. There's one clip that I'm really curious to get your thoughts on, because it's testimony from a lab here in the state of Illinois that we spoke about pesticides. Maybe this will be a good tip for you and others maybe that are doing their own investigations. But one thing I thought that was interesting was that in what the Chicago Sun-Times had found in the past about Illinois is that only about 7% of Illinois cannabis had failed, according to what. So it's important to establish that the state of Illinois actually doesn't collect passing results, which I think is interesting because I think that really would offer a window into, let's just say, a lot. I don't want to draw any specific conclusions, but if we're only collecting failing results, we're getting part of the picture. You get what I'm saying, Kirk?
Yeah.
But even in that, apparently, so we do have a total number of tests that were submitted, and of that, in the analysis, they found 7% had failed. And even in Michigan's far more permissive market, they see about 25% failure. So it's like, it just seems, like I say, numbers like that stand out to me. And one person from Michigan said if they were dealing with Illinois standards, they would see a failure rate of about 50%. So maybe these operators are just very adaptable. I'm not trying to, again, I'm not like you, I'm trying to approach this with a null hypothesis. But it just, those numbers stand out to me as like, it makes me cock my head, you know?
Well, I think, let's see, when I was in Illinois last and testing product, which was just very, very, very recently, it was over 50% tested at 20% or greater out for potency. I didn't test pesticides or yeast or mold, but I'm not, listen, if I went to a state and picked product off the shelf and only 7% of it was mislabeled, I'd probably break down and start crying and go, oh my gosh, you guys have done such an amazing job. This is perfect. Every state ought to be like you. That's not what I'm finding out there, Cole. I'm finding 50% or better. That's what I'm finding in the cannabis sector. Here's what I'm finding in the cannabis sector. It is so easy, Cole. It is so easy to go into a dispensary and pick product off the shelf. Okay, give me that one and that one and that one, and hit a 50% mark or so close to it. The difference doesn't matter. So if you can do that on potency, then there's a real problem. And if somebody said, well, we've done a comprehensive study in Illinois and we only found 7%, I would say, well, you're just, I don't know, maybe you're inept. I guess. I don't know. Maybe you don't know what you're doing. I don't know. Maybe you only tested 3 products, so that it's 7% or something. I don't know. But,
well, we'll shift to solutions here in a second. I just wanted to show you this clip to see to get your thoughts on it. And like I said, this is from a testing lab here in the state of Illinois, and I thought this was interesting to see. So here we go.
I want to talk about one aspect. I apologize. Hopefully, it won't be too in depth in chemistry, but a situation right now we're living in Illinois. In Illinois today, we have a pesticide test that we cannot do. The test requires us to test for 350 different pesticides. If we were to even get the materials of known purity, it would cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars even to be able to do that. But what makes it worse is it says the specification should be the tightest specification of any product that would have that pesticide. So, for example, we're having arguments right now, having a pesticide, and we're using a specification of what's in sheep. Because the way the regulation is written, you have to test for 350, and the criteria you have to use is the tightest of all specs for all types of foodstuffs. So the absurdity of that situation is just paramount. What's it driving? Non-compliance. No, since none of us can actually do the test, every laboratory is doing something different. Many of them are not even doing the test. So with the intention of creating the most stringent criteria actually caused the opposite. It actually is causing non-compliance. So really important about regulations. The second one I'd argue.
So curious your thoughts on that. That's straight from a lab. He's actually been on the show.
And I think it's important that if a regulatory sector is going to change or require something new, that it like a test for a new pesticide, right, or one that's not on the list currently, that it understands all the steps that a lab has to go through in order to certify, right, in order to find out that they have a high level of competency and get the proper reference material and all that they have to go through to accomplish that before it can be added to the list. It's not just like add it to the list. It's far more involved than that. And he's right. $100,000 or more, whatever the number is, in order to outfit your lab so that you can test for this new pesticide. And look, I would say this, my goodness, There's so much that can be done now. If I can go to a store and pull 10 products off the shelf and 5 or more are labeled incorrectly, look, how about we just clean up the big mess we have? And then we can go on and add other pesticides to the list, or, whatever have you from a consumer safety perspective. Let's just clean up the mess that's already there.
Yeah, well said. Well, and I realize we've touched on certain bases of the what you see as the solution to this. You mentioned inline testing and everything else. Like I say, I want to close with that. We just got less than a minute clip that I did want to play since we've referenced it a few times, folks. Here are the findings of the Chicago Sun-Times investigation.
What's in your weed? Sun-Times reporters spent months analyzing thousands of laboratory results for failing weed. The most frequent case of failing weed: too much yeast and mold.
Molds are spore-based. We're breathing in yeast right now. So if there's yeast in your air, there's going to be yeast on the product.
So we went shopping. We bought 10 samples at 8 dispensaries around Chicago and the suburbs. 9 were pre-rolls, 1 was fresh cannabis flower. We brought them to a state-approved cannabis testing lab for analysis, where the outside packaging was carefully opened and the samples dropped into the lab's sterile containers. Here's what the lab found. 8 of the 9 pre-rolls tested above the state limits for at least one microbiological contaminant, such as yeast and mold. Total viable aerobic bacteria, coliform bacteria, and bile-tolerant gram-negative bacteria. 4 tested above state limits for all of those.
So if folks want to see the full report, because I did shorten that down, the full report's about 2 minutes, and I had the investigators on my show. You can check out the show notes. But I'm really happy that folks like you and them have done this work, because it's important. I think everybody just sees the label on their product and they assume, well, this is accurate. And so in many cases, as you say, it's not.
And if there's one more thing I can add, Cole, we haven't brought it up yet, but I think this is a very important step in dealing with lab fraud, and that is require in your regulations that not only does the cannabis business submit a certain amount of product for testing, but that the lab also retain a certain amount of product for retesting. So if the lab is colluding with the cannabis business, the lab is holding its own evidence of collusion in its lockup. And so then that will answer the question, well, did the company submit a fake sample, or did you test him properly?
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about before I let you go is the solution. And again, I know that we've talked about the solution a few times. So, if you want to restate a few points, but what I wanted to fold into the loop was this discussion about hemp, because in many ways I view it as, like I see some of the things people post online and I'm like, wow, yeah, those are some sketchy products. I definitely would never consume those. I don't know if you've seen some of the vapes or whatever that have cannabinoids that I've never even heard of. Like, I would never even, it's crazy to see some of those. But I guess I wanted to fold sort of that into this, because many times people point to the state regulated cannabis systems and they're like, well, this is the solution to basically our cannabis regulation problems. And so I wanted to sort of fold some of those subjects into this subject. Like, do you think, besides what we've discussed so far, anything else would address those issues?
Yeah, hemp is a consumer safety nightmare. 91% of the vape products I test are actually cannabis, not hemp, and 99% of the flower that I test is actually cannabis, not hemp flower. In fact, THCA is one of the biggest cons pulled on the consumer and the regulatory sector in the United States of America. Almost all of it is cannabis. It came from cannabis. It never was hemp in the first place. It's not a type 3 plant. It's a type 1 plant. So far more needs to be done with the regulatory, and I think they're doing it. I think states are addressing this. Look, states, these regulatory sectors like the enforcement sector, they're big organizations. It takes a lot to turn them and train them and focus them in a particular direction. And I think now you're seeing part of the fallout of all of these misrepresented products that are on the shelf from the states that are really jumping in there and saying, hey, we're going to regulate this much more than we do now.
I guess my thing is, like you say, these products are truly identical. We've had like big cannabis companies come on the show, and like you say, they're you know, they are the same exact thing as you would find in a dispensary. You know, like something that's sold as a THCA flower is exactly like a dispensary flower. My question though is like, what? Because I actually think in many ways what's going on with hemp, and hear me out here. I think it's cool, like that you can get it mailed to your door, or like there's cannabis drinks that you can get at Target now and Circle K and stuff. Like, I feel like in a way it like uncaged cannabis from this controlled substances framework, if you will. And so I'm wondering, like, how do we keep some of those really awesome things that have come with hemp, I'm going to say in air quotes, and apply it to all of cannabis? In other words, like, deschedule the plant entirely, but how do we solve some of those issues that have come, like you say, with hemp?
I think the issue is going to be solved with the business itself. Operate with integrity. I mean, look at Wild Brand, WYLD. They do gummies in the hemp space. These guys are amazing. I've tested their product in 4 different states. They're like right on the money in terms of label accuracy. So it can be done. You just have to want to do it. And the cannabis business shouldn't be looking at the hemp industry, cannabis industry shouldn't be looking at the regulatory sector and go, well, you're not making us, or I don't know, whatever have you. Look, just operate with integrity. Determine that you're going to put a product on the shelf that is safe for the consumer, that doesn't have pesticides in it, that is yeast and mold free or within certain specs, and that is accurately labeled. Just put that on the shelf. Just manufacture and grow and process and package correctly. That's when everything changes.
And that's kind of what I'm asking. Like, let's say we like for example, Minnesota codified what the Farm Bill did with hemp, and that's how they can have these cannabis drinks just sold in, you know, movie theaters and Target and stuff like that. And so my question is, like, if we did that, would it just be that we had like a GMP certification requirement? I'm asking you mechanically how we could deschedule cannabis, like has basically been done with the Farm Bill with 2018, but then weed out some of those bad actors that people have concerns about. Is it GMP or is it more complex than that?
Well, if you require GMP for the hemp sector, I mean, you're not even requiring that for the cannabis sector.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is that example that you use, Wild, I think many other brands in the hemp sector that are sort of public facing like that are big and well known, they will all say they have GMP certification. So that's why I'm asking, like, is that the direction we're headed in, or
it will be? I think it will be, and I think, you know, there are already I don't know, a dozen or more, maybe a couple dozen class action lawsuits in the cannabis and hemp space that are alive and well out there in the litigation world right now. And I think that the companies that are going to survive are going to be using GMP processes, whether they're GMP certified or not. They're going to be using GMP processes. I mean, doesn't the milk industry, doesn't the beef industry, doesn't the egg industry, don't they all use current good manufacturing processes in their production, in line, and ultimately in their packaging? And there's a reason for that. You know, they want the consumer to be safe. They want the consumer to come back and buy from them. You know, they want to be known as somebody you can trust.
Yeah. Well, hey, I know we're like a little bit over our time. Are you game for just a quick conversation about THCA flower before you go?
Sure.
Cool.
Listen, I'm here. Go for it.
Okay. One thing that you said like 90% or whatever of it is fraudulent. What I was told by somebody, because like I was like, yeah, like you set it on fire, then THCA converts to delta 9 THC. Then it's marijuana. I'm saying in air quotes because of all the federal arbitrary distinctions. What they told me though is that it remains hemp, even if you shelf test it and it technically comes back with a higher Delta 9. They're saying that COA they produced was pre-harvest. So whenever, or at least that's how they've responded to allegations like that in the past. How do you respond to that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think there are a lot of people out there that are talking about pre-harvest testing and
Right.
and sometime and product sits on the shelf and it you know the D9 labels change, D9 levels change, and all. They don't know the first thing about what they're talking about. You know, I mean, I'm out there. I test product. I've been to. I'm tired of testing hemp product. I've tested so much of it. And listen, and I'm involved in class action litigation. Nobody's whipping out any COAs from pre-harvest testing. They're going to a short list of tired labs across the United States of America and saying, "Here's my COA. Look, I had my product tested." And listen, there's so much document fraud in the hemp space from these COAs. If I go to a hemp, I could name companies. We won't do it right now, but I just harvested a group of COAs off of a hemp company's site out of doesn't matter, out of the Midwest somewhere. 100% of their COAs were document fraud. They weren't even real. They were just cut and paste. Another one I'm thinking of, I just recently did, like 70% were document fraud, where they were just wholly made up and names were changed, you know, and information removed. I mean, this is the reality of the hemp flower space. We go buy some hemp flower and say, "Let me see your COA, pre-harvest COA." No one has those because they're buying flower from the cannabis sector or from the illicit marketplace, and they're putting it in their store, and it's being marketed as a hemp compliant THC flower, and it's being sold. That's why 99% of the product I test turns out to be cannabis, not hemp, as in Delta 9 levels, you know, way above, you know, 0.3.
Yeah. You mean marijuana, right? The distinction is it's all cannabis, but like if it's below 0.3, it's hemp. I'm just saying this for my listeners. And if it's over 0.3, it's quote unquote marijuana.
Well, look, it's all gasoline.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Right. It's all fuel for a vehicle, but some of it's diesel and some of it's premium and some of it's unleaded, and it's all milk, right? But some of it's 2% and some of it's whole milk and some of it's non-fat. And look, there are distinctions that industries make all over the place. It's not just ibuprofen. It's 100 milligram, 200 milligram, 500 milligram, 1200 milligram tablets. Everything's different. And so the distinction is there for a reason.
So question about the THCA flower. I think this is my last one. And then we can close. Did you find anything other than the fact that the Delta 9 exceeded into that, you know, threshold in which it is marijuana / cannabis, as you're saying? Or like, did you find anything like with pesticides or anything else? I guess is what I'm asking.
You know, I don't do much pesticide testing for hemp products. I mainly stick with the potency issue. And look, there's some cannabis that tests at hemp levels. Right.
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking.
There's some cannabis out there that tests lower than 0.3% Delta 9 THC by dry weight. Well, great. I guess that can be hemp too, right? I mean,
Kirk, one of the things that's interesting is that the foundation of the state legal cannabis markets is that they buy these seeds as hemp, because before the 2018 Farm Bill, the answer was always immaculate conception, because you couldn't legally buy seeds, right? Like literally, that's what they used to say is immaculate conception. So they are growing the same thing. You know, it's just, and like you say, I've seen several dispensary products that could qualify as, and I'm saying in air quotes, hemp. And that's really what I'm asking you, Kurt. And that's why I'm asking you this, Kurt, because in some ways I view it as the coolest thing ever. Like, I feel like if you would have asked like Tommy Chong or something back in the day, it's like, hey, you can get weed mailed to you. You just have to say it's hemp. It's like, all right, man, I'll do that. But I guess my question is, I want to make sure though that, we do have comprehensive testing if people have concerns about that we're not just focusing on Delta 9 levels to fit an arbitrary distinction. And that's why I asked you, when you tested THCA flower, were you seeing other alarming results? Because, a lot of people in the space will say that THCA flower is just this pesticide laden, leftover stuff from the cannabis industry. And I'm like, maybe that's true, but maybe some people are just calling it hemp and selling weed.
Well, listen, if you sell it in the hemp, and by the way, back before they used to call it oregano. So,
It's right. Or novelties.
Yeah. I wouldn't be so quick to say that it's all pesticide laden and it couldn't sell as cannabis. And so now it's in the hemp market. I mean, there's a huge advantage to selling cannabis in the hemp industry, right? Taxes. They don't tax you to death. The government doesn't tax you to death like it does in the cannabis sector. It's tough to operate when your effective tax rate is 60% or whatever it happens to be. It's hard to make a living. So in the hemp sector, you don't have those issues. So sell it as hemp.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and I'll keep this brief because we're over our time, but I actually found in Illinois, there are variances in which you can source hemp. You have to use it for your infused products, so only for vapes and edibles. But you can actually source hemp in the state cannabis market. I've talked to people that have bought THCA, bought distillate or biomass. That's what it is.
Yeah.
In bulk. So it's interesting. Hemp is even, and it's the same thing. Like you said, they can source it for much cheaper. It's just business, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Well, Kirk, I apologize for going a little bit over our time. I had a lot of fun with you, and I think we should do this again sometime as you continue to go through. We did get one question. I think you already covered it, and if you can't get into specifics, that's okay. But somebody did ask, who is funding him? Didn't you say you're just working with different cannabis businesses or something?
Who is funding me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, attorneys take cases on.
Okay.
So, that's one source of funding, if you will, for the projects that I do. And some of it's done by individuals and some of it's done by the regulatory sector. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, again, Kirk, would love to do it again. Keep up the great work. And please let me know if you do more stuff in Illinois. Always willing to share stuff, so that you get all the attention you deserve. So
thanks. And thanks for having me on the Cole Memo.
Absolutely. Folks, I hope you found value in this episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.